Hello, third grade, and welcome to lesson 8-6. In this lesson, we're going to work on estimating sums. So that means estimating what the total would be when we're adding numbers together. Let's go ahead and watch our short video lesson and get into our notes and our guided practice.
How can you estimate sums? Think about this question during the lesson. Do the two pandas together weigh more than 500 pounds? Estimate 255 plus 329. If you need to find the total weight of the two pandas, can you estimate to find the sum? No. If you need to find the total weight of the two pandas, you need to find the exact sum, so you can't estimate. You estimate to find about how much the two pandas weigh. Can you tell without rounding that the sum is greater than 500?
So how can we guess, or how can we tell without rounding that the sum is greater than 500? Well, we know that 200 and 300 by themselves make 500. So we can tell that since there's more than just 200 and 300, we have all of these other numbers. We have an extra 55 here and an extra 29 here. We can tell right away that our sum is going to be more than 500 because the only way it would be 500 is if it was only 200 plus only 300.
Yes, you can. 200 plus 300 equals 500. So, 255 plus 329 has to be greater than 500. One way to estimate the weight of the two pandas is to round to the nearest hundred. 255 rounds to 300, and 329 rounds to 300. 300 plus 300 equals 600. So 255 plus 329 is about 600. 600 is greater than 500. The pandas together weigh more than 500 pounds. Why does 255 round to 300? Why does 329 round to 300?
All right, so let's think about basic rounding rules here. So one of the easiest ways to think about rounding is is it more than halfway between the 100 group that you're in and the next 100 group if we're going to round to the hundreds? So when you want to look for rounding, look at the group that you're in. So here we're looking at hundreds. So we have to look at the group that we're in, which is the 200s, and the next group up from that is the 300s. And then we need to think, is 255 past the halfway point or at the halfway point? Now think, halfway between 200 and 300 is 250. So if a number gets to the halfway point or it's more than it, then we're going to round it up. Just like this one, 300, we're going to look between the number that we're in and the next group. So between 300 and 400. 329 is less than 350, which would be the halfway point between 300 and 400. If it's less than the halfway point, then it's going to round down. It's closer to 300 than it is to 400.
255 is closer to 300 than it is to 200. So 255 rounded to the nearest hundred is 300. 329 is closer to 300 than it is to 400. So 329 rounded to the nearest hundred is 300.
Remember, the closer number can be a greater number or a lesser number.
Another way to estimate the weight of the two pandas is to use compatible numbers. Compatible numbers are numbers that are close to the addends and easy to add mentally. 255 is close to 250, and 329 is close to 325. 250 plus 325 equals 575. 255 plus 329 is about 575, and 575 is greater than 500. The total weight of the two pandas is more than 500 pounds. The compatible numbers 250 and 325 were chosen because they are close to 255 and 329, and they are easy to add. What other compatible numbers could have been used?
All right, so let's stop and think. Let's see what numbers are close to 255 that we can put. So we could always go with 250 and 329. Maybe we rounded that to 325 like we did in the original question. Or let's pick different numbers. Maybe you wanted to round 255 up to 275 and 329 to 325 because we know 25 plus 75 makes a group of 100. And then the 200 plus the 300, so that would make 600. So when you're using compatible numbers, what you want to do is you want to pick numbers that are close to your original numbers that are easy to work with. Compatible numbers do not follow the same rules as rounding. So it makes it a little bit easier sometimes to choose numbers that are closer to your original numbers, which sometimes will also mean that your estimate is going to be closer to the real answer than it would have if you used rounding.
You could have chosen different compatible numbers, such as 250 and 300. Now you know how to estimate sums using compatible numbers.
All right, let's get into our notes and our guided practice together. Now, 8-6, estimate sums. So how can we estimate sums? We can use rounding, which has to follow certain rounding rules, or we can use compatible numbers, which do not follow the same rules as rounding. So compatible numbers, like I said, are numbers that are close to your real number, but they don't have to follow the rounding rules. And I'll give you an example. So let's go ahead and take a look. We want to find the sum of 147 plus 24. Now, if I'm rounding to the nearest group of 10, so I'm going to be looking at my tens group, is 147, is it closer to 140 or to 150? So I know that if I drew a number line, 147 is a lot closer to 150. It's only 3 away, right? 47, if you put 47 in your head and you count up, you'll only count up 3 spaces, 48, 49, 50. And 24, because we're going to be looking at the tens group and the tens group after it. So between 20 and 30, we see 24 is before the halfway point. 25 is right in between 20 and 30. That's the halfway point. Since 24 is below the halfway point, it's going to round down. So if I used rounding, I would have 150 plus 20, which equals 170. Now, if I used compatible numbers, I'm still going to change the 147 to 150 if I want to. But the 24, instead of rounding down, I'm going to make it 25 because 50 and 25 are easy to add together. So 150 plus 25 gives me 175. So here my rounding answer was 170. My compatible number answer was 175. Now let's take a look at the actual sum. Here I can see that 147 plus 24 is equal to 171. So estimating using compatible numbers and the estimate using rounding were both close to the answer, but in this case, the rounding answer was actually closer to the actual answer. Now, if we're going to estimate the sum of 178 plus 26, let's stop and think. 178 plus 26, if I'm going to use rounding, 178, and if we're rounding to the nearest 10, we're going to be looking at the digit that's in the tens place, so that's the 7. So we're looking between 70 and 80 is the next tens group. So 178 is closer to 180. and 26 is going to be closer to 30 than it is to 20. So our rounding numbers are going to be rounded to 180 plus 30, which equals 210. For compatible numbers, I decided to also use 180, or I could use 175 if I wanted to. And the 26, I wanted to use 25 instead of 26. So remember, compatible numbers, you don't need to follow the rounding rules. You can change the number any way you like. So if I did 180 plus 25, my answer would have been 205. If I did 175 plus 25, my answer would have been 200. So my actual answer when I added them was 204. So you can see my compatible number answer over here when I did 180 plus 25 was the closest to my actual answer. So remember, with rounding, you have to follow a specific rule. If your number is at the halfway point or greater, it rounds up. If it's less than the halfway point, it rounds down. So if we're looking at 178, or let's look at 26. If we're rounding to the nearest 10, we need to look at the digit that's to the right. So if 6, is it 5 or more, or is it 4 or less? Since 6 is 5 or more, it's going to round up because it's past the halfway point. So if I'm looking at 26 and I'm looking at the tens, I'm looking between 20 and 30. Remember, when we're rounding to the tens, we're looking at multiples of 10. So between the multiple that we're in, which is the 20s, and the next multiple up, which is the 30s. And in between 20 and 30, the halfway point, halfway between 20 and 30 is 25. So I have to look at my number. Is my number 25 or greater? That's going to tell me to go up. Is it less than 25? So 24, 23, 22, or 21? That's going to tell me it's going to round down. All right, let's take a look at our guided practice for this lesson. It says 2 addends are rounded to greater numbers. Is the estimate greater or less than the actual sum? So if you have 2 addends, the 2 numbers that you're working with, and you round both of them up, so you're making both numbers bigger than they actually are, then the estimate that you're going to get is also going to be bigger than the actual number. So I gave you an example here. If you have the numbers 8 plus 6, and we round them, both of these numbers are going to round up. They're both going to become 10 plus 10. Now, 8 plus 6 is 14. Sorry, I forgot to put the 1 in there for you guys. But 10 plus 10 equals 20. So you can see that 14 is less than 20. That means our estimate made our number greater than it actually is. Next, we have Mary and Todd estimate that 143 plus 286. So they estimated the sum of 143 plus 286, but they both got different answers. Can they both be right? Explain. Well, we know that yes, they can both be right because they may have rounded to a different place value. Maybe one of them rounded to the tens and one of them rounded to the hundreds, or they may have used different compatible numbers while they were rounding. Now for numbers 3 and 4, it says round to the nearest 10. So when we're rounding to the tens place, you're looking at the digit in the tens place. We know there are hundreds there. We're going to ignore the hundreds for now. So we're going to look at 18. Is 18 closer to 10 or is it closer to 20? We know that 18 is closer to 20, so 218 becomes 220. Now for 466, we're going to look at the 66. Is 66 closer to 60 or is it closer to 70? Since it's past the halfway point, it's going to be closer to 70. So 466 is going to round up to 470. So 220 plus 470 is going to equal 690 because we know 70 plus 20 is 90 and 400 plus 200 is 600. Next, we have 108 plus 223. So 108, we're looking at the 8. Is 8 closer to 0 or is it closer to 10? We know that 8 is closer to 10. So 108 is going to round up to 110. For 223, we're going to look at the 23. Is 23 closer to 20 or is it closer to 30? Well, we know that it's less than the halfway point, so it's going to round down to 220. 110 plus 220 is going to equal 330. Next, for numbers 5 and 6, we're going to round to the nearest 100. So 514, that means we're going to look between 500 and 600. Remember, you look at the group that you're in and the next group up. So is 514 closer to 500 or is it closer to 600? Well, we know the halfway point between 500 and 600 is going to be 550. 514 is definitely less than 550, so it's going to round down to 500. 258, we're going to look at the 200 group up to the 300 group. So 258 is more than the halfway point because halfway between 200 and 300 is going to be 250. So 258 is going to round up to 300. So 500 plus 300 is equal to 800. Next, we have 198 plus 426. So 198, the nearest 100, we're going to look between 100 and 200. 198 is way past the halfway point, so it's going to round up to 200. 426, we're going to look between 400 and 500. 426 is less than the halfway point. It's less than 450, so it's going to round down. 200 plus 400 is equal to 600. That's it for your guided practice and for this lesson. If you guys have any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, I hope you have a wonderful day. Take care. Bye-bye.